Greetings and welcome to the Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. We hope that you enjoy what you're about to see, and you can find us on the corner of Broadway and Church Streets at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Or you can find us at bgmethodist.org and on Facebook at Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. I'm going to start this morning and ask probably seems like a simple question, but have you ever seen a true master at work? You know, someone who has these skills that you look and you watch and you say, I can't do that. I would really like to be able to do that, but there's no way that I can do that. I realized earlier this week why it is that I've been telling so many stories from college. And so we've been working our way through this hymn, Lord of the Dance, and singing it on a regular basis and looking at the story that it tells, the music that goes with it. It's been bringing back my time when I was in college, where I spent far too much of my time in the music building. And so as we've been doing that, I've been remembering all these different things and been enjoying telling these stories. And one of them that I was reminded of this week was our choir, one of the choirs I was singing. We were getting ready to go to Houston to sing at the American Choral Directors Association National Convention. It was a pretty big deal for us. We had a chance to sing on one of the evening concerts, and it was going to be a great time and a great performance. But it also meant a lot of preparation, because you don't just do that thing and pick the music up a week before. We spent probably a good portion of the year working on the things that we were going to sing at that concert. And as we were growing closer, about a couple of months away, our conductor invited a friend of his to come and clinic us, to give us a critique. And because sometimes it helps to have fresh ears hear what you're doing. And so he comes in, and the person he invited, though, his name is Charles Bruffy, which probably doesn't mean a lot to many of you, but if you are in the choral world, he is one of the biggest names that's in there. He is one of, if not the greatest choral conductor in the nation right now, and one of the best in the world. He's in Kansas City. The choirs that he directs have won several Grammys. I mean, he is just very, very good. And for a bunch of music nerds who were singing in a choir, he was coming to critique us. We were a little bit excited about him coming up there. So he comes up and he is directing us and helping us kind of go to that next level. And at one point in there, you've got to imagine there are about 60 of us in the choir. He is standing on a chair in front of us and conducting, and at one point he is standing on one foot, has his hand out like this, and he's doing this thing. To this day, I can't tell you why he was doing that, but I can tell you what happened when he did. He managed to get a sound out of us that we hadn't ever really had before. And then we would spend the next month afterwards working to recreate and become really familiar with. Because that's what a master of their craft does. They bend and shape the world around them in such a way that it changes. You know, they don't follow what the world is doing. They bend the world to fit what they want it to do. They don't see the world in the same way that we do. And that's what he was doing. Our conductor was sitting off to the side, taking notes and watching this, and we could see he's a very traditional conductor. He's very, very good. In fact, he's now the director of choral activities at MU. He's very good, but he's very traditional. And so he's sitting there kind of wide-eyed going, I'm not sure how I'm going to recreate this later down the road, because he's not going to be able to conduct in that same sort of way. But we were able to make it work. And it started with what he was doing, because he is a master of getting choirs to form and to shape and to become more than they are. But it's not just in music we see this happen either. There are probably a couple generations of painters out there now that make happy little trees every time they touch a brush to a canvas. If you ever watched Bob Ross on PBS, he could take that and he could just take a few brush strokes and he would have this amazing landscape painting on a piece of canvas. I'm sitting back going, I can't draw a stick figure. That is not something I am capable. I can't draw headshots of stick figures. That's how much trouble I have at that. But he makes this look easy. And in time, more other folks, kind of picked up on that and learned from him. But it's not just in art either. If you are coming into the fourth quarter of a football game and you're down by 1, 2, 3, 100 touchdowns, there's a handful of quarterbacks you want behind the line getting ready to make that drive down the field. Growing up in Kansas City, I was a Chiefs fan, still am a Chiefs fan, I should say. And we hated every time that Peyton Manning came to town. Because it didn't matter how big a lead we had going into the fourth quarter, we knew it wasn't going to be a big enough lead. Because there was something that would happen if he's behind going into the fourth quarter. It's almost like he just kind of relaxed a little bit, and that's when you knew you were in trouble, because then he'd just start firing the ball down the field, and he would form his offensive line and offensive team to fit what he needed to be done. It's kind of scary, amazing to watch unless you were on the receiving end of that. Many of you also either have seen in film clips or have watched or were able to watch on the news when Edward R. Murrow would report the news. Right? There was he is still the person that every news anchor is judged by. And very few of them ever live up to, if any ever have, lived up to the standard that he set. The voice of a nation, the voice that people would trust when he came out and he was heard. He was the voice of the master of his craft that would form and shape the news around him so that he could tell it so it could be understood and heard by millions of people. This is what masters do. Masters take the world that is around them and they form it and they shape it into something that is new and different and better than what it was when they started with it. As we look at the story of Holy Week and the season of Lent and the story of what Jesus was going through, we have this realization that we are only ever going to be beginners and learners in comparison to what Jesus was doing. As we come into this story, we look at what happens during this Holy Week. As he is moving through this, and as we start on Palm Sunday, and we go through the week, and Jesus' trip into the temple, and then into the upper room on Thursday night, and then into the garden for a time of prayer, and his arrest and trial, and his presentation in front of Pilate, and then being put in front of the crowds, and then the journey through the city of Jerusalem, and then up to the hill and onto the cross. We never see Jesus rush through any of that. We never see him, kind of almost skittish or nervous. We see him regretful. We see him mourning. We see him in prayer. We see many other things. But it's almost like that time is coming, and he is moving according to a plan that's been set in place. That he's just going from moment to moment to moment to moment. And there are so many that are around him who think they are the ones who are defining what's going on, but what they don't realize is Jesus is shaping the world around him as he goes through this time. He is the one who is doing the forming and shaping, and the world is bending to his will as he is going to that moment, from moment to moment. And we see why when we come to the end of that story. Because as the women come to the tomb that morning, as Tom read our gospel reading for this morning, the women come to the tomb. Now, they are expecting one thing. How many of you have ever picked up a project, gotten halfway through it, and said, I can't finish this. I don't have the skill for it. I don't have the time for it. I don't know how to do this. I have friends of mine that have, at different points in time, gotten interested in knitting, and they have half-finished projects all over the place that sit in a plastic tub back in a closet because they can't ever finish them. The women, as they were coming to the tomb that day, they were seeing a half-finished project. They had followed Jesus, many of them, for a very long time, and he had gotten so far, so very far, but then it was cut off, and it was done, and he wasn't done yet. And so they were coming to the tomb that day to tie up the loose ends and to put that project away in a tomb forever, and it was never going to be pulled out again. That was their expectation. But in the hands of a master, that half-finished work becomes not just completed, but it becomes something that is greater than what anyone could ever have thought of before. Because when they come up to the tomb that day, they see that, one, the tomb is empty. There is no one inside of it. And there is an angel that is there by the tomb who is telling them that Jesus isn't here. Jesus has risen from the dead. And now your job is to go back and tell his disciples that this has happened, that he isn't here, that this half-finished project that you thought was done and incomplete and would never be taken up again has been completed and has been made glorious and has been made bigger and better than anything you could imagine before. And then you've got to go back and tell his followers that it is done and He is alive. And they go back, they're on their way back, and as they're on that road, Jesus appears to them in person, and they see, not just from the words of the angels, but they see for themselves that Jesus is alive. And He tells them again, go and tell my disciples, tell them I'm going to meet them in Galilee. And these women go back to the disciples, and they become the first preachers of the gospel. They tell the first Easter message as they go to tell those disciples that He is risen, that He is not there in the tomb, and that you are going to see Him again. This is the message of Easter. And as we go from here in this Easter season and we go to take that next step, that is the hope that we take. Because it's not just that we take that story that has been told once long ago, but generation after generation after generation has since been telling that story. We talked about it with the kids earlier in the service. At Oak Grove this morning, the kids did an Easter program, and they had a cardboard tomb and a cardboard stone that was rolled in front of it and then rolled away. But they were telling that story that started with those women who first went out and shared that message, now has been continued from every generation because we can see the Master at work. The Master has been guiding and leading and directing and shaping the world around Him that we are a part of, shaping and guiding us to become something more than we could ever be on our own. We can only ever be half complete on our own, but He makes us whole and makes us into something more than we could ever know before. This morning as we come together, we get to share in a part of that gift that He gives, not just in the joy and the celebration of Easter, but we get to share in the sacrament of Holy Communion, where in that time, that boundary between Master and disciple becomes blurred as we come up to the table, where we end. It's hard to tell where we end and where Jesus begins, because this is the moment where we grow closer, where we come closer, where we learn more, where we are filled more with His Spirit as we gather in a way that we can't explain, but we know that the Master's hand is at work as we gather at this table. And so today we're going to share in this sacrament of Holy Communion and share in this time as we gather together. As we do that, as we come through that, we're going to kind of take a journey through the season of Lent, reminding ourselves of where we have been. We started those many days ago on Ash Wednesday. In our formal communion liturgy, this would be the time we would call it the confession and the pardon. That's what we do on Ash Wednesday. We come and we recognize that we are human, that we're going to make mistakes, that we're going to run into trouble, that we aren't going to do the things right that we need to. And as Jesus reminds us on multiple occasions, He knows that we're going to mess up. And He tells us that, not as an act of condemnation, but as a statement of fact, saying it's going to happen, but then in the next breath He says, and I give you grace. So it's not just a confession that we have done wrong, but it is also hearing the pardon and the words of assurance that Jesus says, and that is not going to define you. I am going to define you, because I am the Master of you. You are shaped and you are guided by me, not by all these other things. And so we hear and we remember that even though we know we aren't going to be perfect, in His hands we can be shaped and formed into something more. And we go from Ash Wednesday to the season of Lent, this time of preparation and gathering and learning and growing, and then Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem. And last Sunday we called this opening night. This was the first part of the story, of the climax of the story, that Jesus was going into the joy and the celebration of the palm branches that were on the ground, of people's coats as they were taking them off and putting them on the ground as Jesus was walking across and coming into the city, to the shouts of joy and Hosanna. They were so glad to see Him coming into that place, and so thankful that He was going to be there. And then we see as His journey goes through that week, and He comes to Thursday night, as Jesus is gathered with His disciples in that upper room. As they are gathered in that room, this week I was reminded of the Good Friday service that we held here in our church, and Pastor Wes Phillips from the Nazarene Church was preaching. He reminded us of something so very important as we were gathered for that service. He reminded us as Jesus took the bread and He lifted it up, that this was nothing special about this bread, really. This was bread that they knew, that they had used this kind of bread before. This was nothing unusual at all about it. It was ordinary, everyday bread. But then Jesus lifted it up. He gave thanks to God. He gave it to his disciples and said to them, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat it in remembrance of me." And then he took the cup. Something I had never really thought about before, but Wes reminded us, this was not a room that any of the disciples owned. This was a room they were renting out from someone else, so that they could meet up there. That meant that the utensils and the cups and everything that were there were things that had been used maybe 1,000 times before. Jesus took that ordinary, everyday, used cup. Nothing special about it until he lifted it up. And he gave thanks to God. And then he gave it to his disciples and he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." These are the gifts that God gives to us to share and to grow closer to him as we gather on this day. As we come on this day, we come also remembering the joy that we have in celebrating this day. That it's not just a celebration of the good thing that Jesus has risen from the dead, but it's a celebration of the work of the Master, who something as ordinary and as common to us as human people as death is not something that can even hold him back. It is not something that defines him, but he has risen from that place and transformed all of our existence into something different, into something special, into something greater than it can ever be on its own. And so as we come today, as we prepare to receive these gifts of bread and of juice, let us give thanks to God, and let us go to him in prayer. Let us pray.